What's real and what's for sale? Well, you're about to find out. Welcome to Gen X Wasteland, although we can say it's also a little Aeon Byte collaboration. I am broadcasting across Rumble, my two channels, so we can get to everyone because this is a very special show. And it's a good time to promote the show on different places, as I had to take a little break because of health issues in August and so forth. So trying to get back on track with some Gen X Wasteland shows. Got some good shows on the way. Our last show, we had Robert Phoenix, who actually said some very nice things about our guest, Chris Knowles. And you've been on his show, Chris. And
I
then next
have.
week, we will talk about the Beatles and the conspiracies around the Beatles. So lots going on Aeon Byte and Gen X Wasteland. And glad to see everybody. And Chris, always good to have you on, man. Thanks for coming by.
Oh, it's always a pleasure. Always a pleasure. We have so much to talk about.
Indeed we do. Indeed we do. And it's always amazing to have Sherilyn Jones join. I'm already losing it
Dwayne
already.
Jones.
Yeah,
Dwayne
not enough
Jones.
caffeine.
She Joneses us.
I'm jonesing for Jones.
Jonesing, you're trying to keep up with me, all that good stuff.
Yeah,
A name that's a cliche. It's so great to have a name that's also a cliche. You know, it just makes my heart warm. I'm really looking forward to this conversation, making me wistful for the days when we would go over to each other's houses and watch shows and experience it all together. So it's kind of what it feels like, little digital campfire here for us.
Good old days. Those were the good old days. So awesome. Yes. So if you have, as always, if you have any questions, please super chat them if you're watching on the main Aeon Byte channel so I can get to them. And we will do our best. So let's get into the main event, Chris. Your new book, God, I am losing. I think it's, yes, XF Ultra. An amazing read. I really enjoyed it. Enjoyed every chapter. It was so entertaining, and it goes beyond that. And as you say, Chris, OCD, was that really what made you write it, or what happened? Because you leave no stone unturned.
I think OCD is pretty much the driving force between everything I do. So, yeah, I've been obsessing on the X-Files for a very long time, and I started obsessing on it real early. I remember I was having dreams about the X-Files, like in the first season, one of which was prophetic, by the way, which is interesting. But the thing that really feeds my OCD with it, or my obsession with it, is there's just so many layers upon layers upon layers upon layers. There's so much context, there's so much subtext, there's so many Easter eggs, there's so much thematic resonance. There's so much scientific and paranormal and religious and philosophic types of influences there. There's just so much meat on the bone. I mean, it really is just like a big, big feast. There's so many X number of seasons, 9 real seasons, and then the 2 sort of fake ones, and two feature films. So there's just a lot to dig into. There's a lot of material. And then it also sort of connects to that whole time period. There were a lot of shows that shot in Vancouver in the 90s. Somebody had mentioned the Stargate shows. There's, Supernatural is a little bit later, but there's just so many shows that just came out of that time period that were so, I hate to say magical because it sounds a bit doofy, but I don't know. There really just was a kind of magic there. There was a real synthesis, a real energy, and it surfed the zeitgeist. It plugged directly into the zeitgeist. And interestingly enough, I mean, even I don't know if it was to its benefit, but even those what I call the non-canonical seasons, the glorified fanfic seasons, the Gnostic gospel seasons, let's just call them. There's still so much. There's still so much to dig into. maybe even more so. I mean, maybe one of the problems with those episodes is that they're just too stuffed. There's too much meat on the bone, you know. You need a little gravy or something, you know, you need some rice, you know, it's very, very meaty. And I'm always discovering things. I mean, it's what, 33 years on now, and I'm still discovering things. I'm still discovering little references and connections. It's really like nothing else. I mean, you've got long running science fiction franchises, to say, like Star Trek and everything, and there's a lot to dig into in Star Trek, which I've certainly done, right? But it just doesn't have the same resonance. It doesn't have the same impact. And you know, you have a show that was really digging into so many thorny questions, and doing so, you know, to an audience of 20 million people a week, which is just unimaginable today. You know, it's before the internet, before atomization, before streaming, you know, before all these things. I mean, we had a limited number of networks that everybody sort of watched the big shows, and you know, it was something that everybody talked when I was working in New York, everybody talked about the X-Files on Monday morning. You know, that was like the big topic of discussion. So, I mean, what is like that today? I don't think we really have anything to fill that gap. So there's just so much, and not only just so much, but like interesting questions, you know, so much about the mystery cults, which I went to great length to catalog all the allegories, particularly of Orpheus and Eurydice. Before we went live, we were talking about all the Gnostic elements in it, and connections to Gnostic scripture. Particularly, you know, I went into the Mandeans, but it was also the Gospel of Judas too. So it's just plugged in, and it's plugged in a way that I think when people watch the show, they don't know what they're watching. And the main reason I did this book is that I want people to really recognize what they're seeing, you know, what is going on. And I think it's only fair that, you know, these writers would spend so much time, work so hard, and do so much research, so much reading to put all this content into the stories, that I think people, you know, particularly people in our sort of realm, in our field, whatever this is, you know, whatever this little world that we're in is, I think if you haven't really watched this show, it's almost like you really should. When people tell me, like, particularly like UFO people, when they tell me they never watched the X-Files, I was like, really? Seriously? I remember I did Tim Binnall's show back like a million years ago. And, you know, I mentioned something about the X-Files, and he's like, oh, I never watched it. I was like, wait, you got a UFO podcast and you never saw the X-Files? Like, how does that work? So, and how could you be like, you know, I think he was either a younger Gen Xer or an older millennial. And it's like, how can you be in that time period when you were in high school when that show was on the air? It's like, how did you never watch it? That just doesn't track for me. So anyway, I want people to really understand like just how much content there is, and just how much it has to do with things that are going on in the world today. You know, so
yeah, it's still very relevant, and again, a great read. Again, Chris is very honest. He even scores. It's not like he's just writing a hierarchy of the X-Files. He says this really sucked and this is the bad things. And I didn't know all the pregnant women who got fired in the 80s and 70s. I guess, you know, times have changed, right? And of course, Chris is, as I said, drive-by throwing shade at J.J. Abrams is always gold. And it's
always well deserved too.
Yeah, I think one of the darkest times when the Secret Sun was about 10 years ago, when everybody was under the spell of J.J. Abrams, and you had to slowly teach them the truth, and you were very patient about it. You know, you didn't just come out. You just, let's look at his directing and the way the flashes, and you slowly showed the world that he was just the biggest fraud in the world, thank God. But
well, everything he's ever done has been either a remake or a rip-off of somebody else's work,
including the X-Files.
Including the X-Files, yeah, Fringe. Fringe is an interesting case too, because that was a series that I was into when it was in the early seasons. I kind of got tired of it after a while, but the first season, I've really come to see it as quite sinister, because all the stories are about, like, basically, MK Ultra Manchurian candidate types being activated, and I really have not dug into it yet, because it's almost like I wouldn't know how to, but I can't get over the let's call it the synchronicity for now, that Amy Bishop went on her little shooting rampage a week after the episode aired, called the Bishop Revival, and had sort of connections there. If you watch the first season of Fringe, it is rather sinister. It's like, was this show meant to activate sleepers or something? You always get that feeling, because that's what every episode is about. It's like, I don't know.
Oh, well, let's not sully the waters with this, but let's get to the X-Files, because yes, as you write here, this is quoting your book. It feels less like a TV series and more like some kind of ancient magical text, like something you'd see in some old 80s horror movie. The X-Files seems like to live, breathe, and react to the world. So I see it like Philip K. Dick's, not just writings, but his idea of the plasmic. Because you say any Hollywood person can tap into myth and the occult and UFO and throw it together and repackage it. But this is different. This is the X-Files, Philip K. Dick, Twin Peaks. It's like a virus, right? It's a living thing beyond time and space that keeps entering our consciousness, right, Chris? It's unique.
Well, just this week, I mean, there are all these news stories about this. They're going to be doing, yet another reboot, which I'm totally against. Yeah. I was against the last reboot. I'm definitely against this reboot. And just stop, it's you have to learn to let things just end. I think that's a problem that we have, but it's a problem of corporate culture, because they can't come up with new ideas anymore. And anything that even approaches a new idea just fails. So you got to just keep remaking and rebooting and sequeling till the cows come home. We were really spoiled in the 90s, we really were, or in the 80s as well too, right? Before things just started becoming a snake eating its own tail, so to speak, we were spoiled. It was like every month, it seemed, sometimes every week, there was just something really new and exciting bursting forth, whether it was, TV series or a film or a book or a band. And that's all gone. And I think the internet is mostly to blame for that, right? And well, also I covered, like, there's this whole, I don't know, want to call it a trope, but there's this whole sort of it's even a myth, really, that the X-Files grew up with the internet. That the X-Files was the first show to grow up with the internet. First of all, that's not really anything to brag about anymore. But secondly, it was also the first TV show to develop a toxic internet fan base. I personally believe that all fandoms are ultimately toxic, but I remember watching it, lurking in all these boards, and just the vicious nastiness. I saw everything that was coming down the pike today,
it was blue sky before blue sky.
Yeah. But it was really nasty and really brutal. And I think it not only did it hurt the show, but it hurt the show's reputation with other fandoms. It colored people's experiences. When you go back, like a lot of episodes, particularly in the later seasons, when I go back and I watch them, I'm like, oh, this is really good. This is, but everybody would just be trashing it, 5 minutes after it ended on Alt TV X-Files on Usenet or whatever. But it's all just people who just basically hate their own lives and need something to project their self-loathing onto. And that's really become the story of the internet.
Yeah, the X-Files was the beginning of the end, or the end right there.
Yeah, it's the whole, I don't know. It's like a snake pit. And that's what it became. But there was such, just talking about the zeitgeist, there was such a synergy with Generation X, appropriately for this show. I mean, okay, so it was the first show to grow up with the internet, whatever. That's nothing to brag about. But I think it was really a show that was about Generation X. It was about like late boomers and Gen Jonesers in this discussion, let's just say, with Gen X, right? There were so many like Gen X bands that would get played on those shows, and they put out these soundtrack albums with all the hot alternative bands, and there was a huge sort of cult following with a lot of the big alternative bands in that sort of early mid 90s period that I don't think you've really seen since. Hip factor, the hip factor kind of deal. And that was a time when there was still a mainstream culture. Mainstream culture hadn't just dissolved like it did sometime in the 2000s, like sometime during the Bush years. Mainstream culture just evaporated. And I think a lot of that, again, is the internet. But it really was, they did a lot of like sort of Gen X themed shows, episodes, with about disaffected youth, I mean, that's sort of like the young, so you can really split Generation X in half, right? I mean, Generation X is like the 60s kids and then the 70s kids, it's really a different kind of mentality. I think personally, I mean, how old was I? I was 27 when the X-Files premiered. So I wasn't in high school or junior high or whatever. I was fully grown homeowner with two boys. I was an adult taking the train to New York every day. So maybe there's a term that people use. I don't know how it's pronounced, but it's like ex-Zoomer, like Zoomer. I guess it would be Zoomer, but not Zoomer. It's like Zoomer with an X. Like this weird sort of crossover between Generation X and the Boomers. Well, that's fine. I got to experience a lot of that boomer culture firsthand, let's just say.
But at the same time, Chris, you're very specific that the X-Files is a Gen X show. It's not it's not tapping into some, even though it was influenced, by Twin Peaks and The Twilight Zone, and of course Night Stalker, a show that one of my favorite shows. But it was not a boomer show. It really tapped into the rage and the cynicism and the darkness of 90s and Gen X, right? It was its own avant-garde creation.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. This is why I'm just so disgusted by these reboot talks. It couldn't exist outside of that, that time period from like early 90s to the early 2000s. You just can't separate it. Like so many of the attitudes and the beliefs and, things like cyber culture was really embedded into the show. And I mean like the early like hacker culture.
Mm-hmm.
And where did that go? I mean, hackers now are just like, government agents, right? You had a really exciting kind of cyberpunk hacker crossover in the early 2000s, and the X-Files really drew on that as well. So, and like I said, all the, they would have songs by Live and Danzig and I don't know if they had Foo Fighters, but Nick Cave. I mean, they had all the hippest of the hip sort of make a musical appearance in the show, and it really felt like a moment. I remember, like, I was working in the city, but I was still going to like concerts and stuff. I was still kind of tapped into what was going on with quote unquote youth culture. And I mean, it was such a huge part of that culture in the 90s that I think people, like, after a while took it for granted. And there's always this thing where, like, when kids are into something in high school, once they leave high school, they have to hate it. They have to turn on it. You know what I'm saying? Once they get in college, they have to hate everything they liked in high school. And that was also something that I sort of watched unfold, towards the end of the 90s. This real backlash of people who grew up watching the show and didn't want it to continue, when they are out in the real world. I guess, I don't know. It's I don't necessarily understand the psychology there, but there's also sort of that 90s, I guess, for lack of a better term, alternative spirituality. I don't know if you remember. Well, you probably do. Dr. Jones is probably a little too young for that, but remembering, like, how big that was. You had people like Hillman and Scott Peck having bestsellers.
Yeah.
Karen Armstrong, obviously Elaine Pagels, Gnosis magazine later on.
Marianne Williamson was getting started,
a few years. Well, I think of her more as 80s, but she was definitely in the mix. You had, like, the Celestine Prophecy,
the
which
Four
was
Agreements. Yeah, it was in the
huge bestseller. Chicken Soup for the Soul. I mean, that's a little more mainstream, but you really did have very interesting alternative or non-mainstream spirituality in the mix. I mean, this is when neo-paganism was really becoming more mainstream. I think Buffy had a lot more to do with that than the X-Files, though. But it really was a very exciting time that, once the financial incentive kind of bottomed out with everything just becoming free in the internet, you really lost. And I'll tell you something, I miss it. I remember when I was working in New York in the 90s, going to, like, there was a big Barnes and Noble that opened up on 21st Street and 6th Avenue. And it was like the place, it was like going to, like, Studio 54. I mean, everybody was there. It's like, you'd go there after work and the place would just be mobbed. You know what I'm saying? And people were, like, buying books and reading them. And you'd see people reading books on the train and carrying paperbacks in their back pocket and just getting involved with the world rather than just doom scrolling and finding their own little bubble to escape into. And again, I think that's something that really fed the show as well. I mean, there was still a culture, there still was a public conversation. And the X-Files comes in and it's like, well, here's our contribution to the conversation. The government is corrupt. It's experimenting on human beings. It's not telling us the truth.
Yeah.
Everything is controlled by these secret cabals and all this kind of thing. And, that's kind of discussions, I guess, you'd see in the 70s with a lot of conspiracy film, which really had a huge influence on the show. But, and I guess maybe today it's almost become, I don't want to say cliche, but it all started there. Like, God help us all. I mean, you wouldn't have had Alex Jones, I don't think, without the X-Files. You wouldn't have had all this mainstreaming of conspiracy culture. Because
would you call it conspirituality?
Conspirituality,
all
yes.
Connects, yes.
So that's a term that sort of popped up in the past few years. It sort of took hold during the COVID years, the early COVID years, because all these like yoga people and new age people were like, no, we're not going along with this, you know. You know? And the government and the pharmaceutical companies really sicked these guys, let's just say, and started this, you know, they started a podcast and a website, you know, about conspirituality and how new age spirituality has gotten corrupted by conspiracy theory and all the rest of it, and anti-science, whatever that means. You know, and of course we're finding out more and more now that all the science that we thought was established science was really just all a lie. You know, it was all just fake. We were being gaslit into believing things that just were not only not true, but were the opposite of truth. So I think the X-Files had a lot to do with that, but also like that spiritual dimension, because there were a lot of episodes that dealt with like religion and, you know, Scully was a Catholic and they played off that a lot and everything like that. So it was always this sort of debate, you know, Mulder's taking this sort of new age alternative thinking and Scully's like, you know, the mainstream Catholic type of establishment voice. And that's an interesting dynamic that I don't think you could even get away with today. You know, how many shows today make like a philosophic debate the focus of their stories? You know, everything now, it's like disagreement is sinful, let's just say, right?
Yeah.
You know, you can't have this dialectic, because if you disagree with whatever the orthodoxy is in Hollywood circles that particular week, if you go against that, you know, you're a fascist and, you know, this kind of stuff. I mean, you know, you can't have a series today. This is why I'm wondering, like, what are they going to do if they actually do this reboot, which I'm still very skeptical that it will actually make it to the air. But like, how are you going to get away with it? You know, I mean, you can't have the kind of stories that the show is doing, because I don't know if you read the chapter when I was talking about how the critics just excoriated Chris Carter for the reboot, and just basically, I mean, one accused him of sounding like Sarah Palin. Like,
yes, I read that.
Sarah Palin. Yeah, that's
yeah,
a real that's an appropriate reference in 2016. You know, it's absurd, ridiculous.
You can't win. Oh, Sherilyn, what do you think, or do you have a question for Mr. Christopher Knowles?
Yeah, amen to all of that. I just, like I said, I'm so nostalgic just even thinking about, you know, what the impact that this series had in my life and how I experienced it, because, you know, everything you're saying, Chris, it was that sort of last moment where there was a mainstream, and then everything that was standing up to the mainstream. And at that moment, I was actually working in live music in Florida, and for a promoter and with venues, that we were the only independent music. Like, independent acts didn't used to come south of Atlanta. They just stopped. And so the promoter that I worked with in these venues, they were the first ones to bring people down into Florida, you know. So we did all of the big names, all the Sonic Youth, the Luna, I mean, you name it, we did everyone. And I was incredibly honored to be a part of that. But it felt like, the bands that you would see, first of all, people read, as you were saying, right? It felt like if you were part of this movement and you were in this scene, you read books and you were thinking about things that the mainstream wasn't thinking about. And you felt yourself outside of these political parties that were some joke hanging around, you know? And so the same people who were going to the shows and, you know, running these restaurants and these clubs were also watching the X-Files and reading these books and and it just felt like, and going to the New Age store, which didn't feel like hippie, right? Like, as you're saying, there was this other sort of emerging idea about spirituality that didn't feel like my parents' boomers hippie crap. It didn't feel light. It felt like I'm really asking these questions, and a lot of the answers are pretty damn dark, you know. And I don't know where this is going. You know, some people went in the sort of real pagan, darkish shit, and you know, and you always have the Satan sort of circus shit going on with the music industry. But it just felt like it was a real question, you know, whether it's political or religious or literary. And that Barnes and Noble scene, yes. Yes. You would walk into Barnes. Oh, did you hear that book's going to come out? Oh my God. You know, you go into Barnes and Noble and it was a scene. It was interesting, you know? But yeah, we would get together and we'd watch this show and we would talk about it. And it really was that sort of last, as you're saying, you know, and I was lucky that maybe I'm on the younger end of that Gen X scale, but I was working with people who were about 10 years older than me. So I really got that feel of all that history, you know, and yeah, and it sort of, I don't think I had not a conscious reaction against it as I moved into, but when I went into graduate school, I just I couldn't pay attention to any of that. Right. I had my head sort of buried in the sand for, you know, probably 6 or 7 years with my studies. And when I emerged, it was like, that was all gone. You know, I was raising my kids, I was doing graduate school, and then all of a sudden I come up for air and this whole culture is gone. And now there's, you know, what I thought was an alternative viewpoint. Now the other party, you know, the parties are not that they were ever really different, but it felt like everything had been co-opted and there wasn't anything that represented a true alternative viewpoint anymore. So
yeah, well, certainly not in a commercial mainstream setting.
No, there was no, and the other thing too I wanted to say was that nothing captured my attention and my feeling like the X-Files since I was a young child and in search of.
Yeah.
I'd sit down. It just captured me, right? Is that there are these unanswered questions that we don't know, right? And nothing, and I can remember, and it's not until now that I'm thinking about it, really there was nothing until the X-Files that I just went, okay, right? We're talking about things that no one else thinks. I thought I was the only person that thought about this, you know? So, and there isn't anything like that today. Or I heard you in the interview with the Rune Soup interview, describing Chris Carter as a fractal thinker, and that these people through history that are fractal thinkers, and they're so rare, and they see, honestly, I think people like you and Miguel are fractal thinkers, but we don't have a mainstream held together knit culture.
Yeah, we're all exiles now.
We're dispersed.
We're all exiles. Yes,
right.
We're all wandering through the wilderness.
Yeah, the Yates said the center cannot hold. There is no center.
Exactly.
Like
no, there certainly isn't. But again, I mean, I think that's a function of the technology. Is it going to come around? Are people just going to get tired of hiding in their own bubbles, hiding in their own little cubby holes, and want to come up for air and want to see what other people are talking about and doing? I hope so. I wouldn't say the augurs are particularly positive right now, but people have to be getting tired of just living in such small worlds, just such tiny little landscapes. It's got to be so suffocating. I do blame the internet. The internet has been such a mixed blessing, right? I mean, it is such a it allows us to do what we're doing here, but it allows people to start amputation fetish channels on Signal or something. You know what I mean? It's the ultimate. It really is the ultimate double-edged sword. But the thing is, like all this UFO stuff now, which is just a complete psyop, and I think all of us, when this stuff started bubbling up in 2017, we're just like, all right, goodbye ufology. Yeah. We're done. This is definitely entering the phase of just blatant psyop to cover up technologies, and not too long ago, there was a story that just sort of admitted that like this whole thing with all these congressional hearings and all these whistleblowers and everything like that was all just part of a big operation to muddy the waters when they're testing all these new and exotic drones and so on and so forth. But every time somebody did a story on ATIP or whatever, it was like, oh, the real life X-Files. And I died a little inside every time I heard that expression. It wasn't bad enough that every time there was some sort of news story about a UFO, they'd do the little X-Files theme song.
Of course.
Better call Mulder and Scully.
Yeah,
people,
the truth is out there.
Yeah. People in Quincy, Illinois have seen UFOs flying over their neighborhoods for weeks now. It's just like, oh, please don't do that anymore. It just turns out to be balloons or something. It's some sort of hoax. But I'm kind of glad. I think that UFO, that danger that ufology had of crossing over into religion has, been with us since the 50s and remains very dangerous. I think it's a very dangerous possibility that people could use this culture to build, a space brothers religion, the same way that they're trying to build a religion around, artificial intelligence. Anyway.
Yeah. At the same time, going back to the 90s, didn't the X-Files tap into, I'd say, the culmination of cults, serial killers, and the government exposing itself, Waco, Ruby Ridge, which was a loss of innocence for generations of people. And obviously even Bowie tapped into the serial, or took advantage of the serial thing with his album Outside, or Outside One, or whatever the hell what he did with Eno. But that was a time when that was in the air, right, Chris? Cults, serial killers, and the government exposing itself.
Yes. I don't think Dave McGowan had shown up yet, but people are definitely talking about programmed serial killers. I think Michael A. Hoffman was talking about that in Secret Societies and Psychological Warfare. I do remember that there were a lot of discussions on Usenet, various conspiracy news groups, which I admit that I spent way too much time in.
OCD kicks in again.
But there was, people were really starting to talk about programmed serial killers. And interestingly enough, the X-Files sister show, Millennium, its season or its series finale basically presented that that's what the government was doing. The government was programming serial killers for like a classic program reaction solution type of operation. And that's why I have not a fairly large, but I did spend some time in the book talking about Millennium, because if you watch that show, since it didn't have the sort of ratings and the prestige that the X-Files had, it went a lot more hard in the paint, so to speak, with the conspiracy stuff. They did an episode called Collateral Damage with James Marsters from Buffy the Vampire Slayer that was about stories that I remember reading at that time, that there were tests being used on soldiers during the Gulf War with all these like biotoxins that they were shelling like encampments during the Gulf War in Kuwait or wherever. Americans were being shelled by Americans with these various biological concoctions. And then, of course, that's where we had the whole rise of Gulf War syndrome.
Right.
You probably remember all that, Dr. Jones.
Yeah, from a completely sort of mainstream source, a person I know, a friend who's completely mainstream guy, was a Marine fighter pilot in the Gulf War, and he's told me that his commanding officer came to him when he was over there and handed him out pieces of paper and said, here's your vaccine records for your anthrax vaccine. You received an experimental vaccine, and all of your records have been destroyed. And you just did the right thing as a good dude and said, here it is. And I had another friend who was in the same position. I told him that story. He said, no way. I said, why don't you go grab your file and see if you've got it? And he didn't. It was missing. So it's, I mean, that rabbit hole goes, and all those records were kept in the Oklahoma City building, all the Gulf.
Oh, yes. And of course, the X-Files did a whole riff on that as well. So their version of that in the X-Files movie was a bombing that was remarkably identical in many ways to the Murrah building, and they were also hiding records of biological experiments as well. So they were just pulling straight out of that. I think a lot of people, well, I know for a fact that people like in the CIA and the FBI were feeding those guys story ideas and so on. And I do wonder when I hear that story, which I hadn't heard before, that somebody might have told Chris Carter that story, and then he put it into the movie with that whole thing with the bombing. It's interesting too, looking back. Obviously, a lot of things are going on all the time. This whole idea of like nothing ever happens is just absurd, right? But looking back in the 90s, it's amazing the things that happened. Like the bombing of the Murrah building and all these cults, doomsday cults, but also things like Waco. There was just a lot of mass violence back then. And of course, it all starts off with the Gulf War and then getting into the 90s, that all that nonsense going on in the Balkans and everything. There's just a lot of violence after a period like in the 80s where we weren't really involved in any overseas adventures. We weren't involved in any police actions for a few years, starting I think around 75 up until the Gulf War. And interestingly enough, that was also like the most I would argue creative period in American history, but also probably the most prosperous and the most I don't want to say peaceful, but relatively peaceful period when we weren't having all these overseas wars that just kick up, whether it's through osmosis or by design, that these overseas actions, the war always comes home, so to speak. And we enjoyed that interregnum, from the period with the end of the Vietnam War to the Gulf War, and so many things were happening and so many things were possible that I'm personally very grateful for. And I do really feel bad for younger people who grew up, particularly people who grew up after 9/11, when everything changed and so many opportunities just vanished and things just got very, very difficult, particularly for young people. And it's something that I feel really, really bad about. Gen X likes to complain a lot. Oh, we were drinking hose water. We subsisted on hose water and neglect. And it's just like, yeah, well, we were also free. We were free to just run wild. I can't believe the things that I got away with. So.
Totally feral. I wanted to ask you, Chris, what do you think? I mean, I don't think it was planned. I don't think there's any nefarious planning in this way, but it seems to me the X-Files almost feels like a release valve, right? For everything, what you're saying, those events of the early 90s. And I can remember that, being a young mom and still a good little Christian at the time and watching Waco burn and seeing this family get murdered by our own government and just feeling like this is the end of the world. Like our country is going to collapse. And then from the other side, that people who young, progressive, liberal sort of people, the the betrayal that they felt from the Clinton regime, right? That they thought they had a president, right? That, oh, well, now we're going to have representation. It's like, no, now the government's going to come and murder you. That's you know.
I
And
shouldn't laugh. I shouldn't laugh. That's you're absolutely right.
Well, as
It's
you
a
said,
grim
and the
reality.
absurdity of it, right? That there's this, as you said, with the Rod Serling story, right? The absurdity. You have to, like, what is happening here? And that there was, the X-Files was like, no, you're not crazy. The government actually is trying to kill you. And there are these unanswered questions, and you don't have representation. So to me, it seems, and I don't want to say it's a release valve that was planned so we'd all just shut up and go away, because I don't think that was the outcome. But it did feel like that, as I said, a release valve, because, Clinton wasn't what people thought he was going to be, as and
no, he was just a continuation of the Bush. I mean, I think Clinton is actually a Bush. I think he's a secret Bush.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's one of the Bush brothers, bastard child.
Right. Or a Rockefeller, or
Yeah, well, that's the other thing. Yeah, people thought that he was Rockefeller's illegitimate son. But then again, they said that Rockefeller was also gay too. So, who knows? The Rockefeller, who was the governor of Arkansas for quite some years. And what the hell was a Rockefeller doing down in Arkansas?
Well, it was a big mob drug running place. A lot of dirty money would go through Arkansas. Yeah.
Yes, that's true. There is the hillbilly mafia there, but there's also a lot of CIA and military kind of misadventures there. Mena Airport. I don't know if Dr. Jones heard about that when she was in the military, but yeah. And
the Walton family, and I mean, you can count it. It's a hub for sure. But there was a big bait and switch there. And I do feel like by 90, when did the X-Files? Did they come out 96?
93.
93?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
A release valve. 100%. Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. But I mean, because it seems like by 95, people thoroughly understood that this is over. Like mainstream is, and I know it took till the 2000s for the media part of it to really kind of collapse, but I think people who were, thinkers and readers and oriented towards alternative spirituality, not necessarily, things that are really off the wall, but just, whatever I'm hearing in my church that I grew up doesn't quite fit, there was no place for us, right? If you're thinking, if you're reading, if you are asking these questions, if you don't fit in at your church, there's no place for you in this culture, right? Because you don't get the pill of the Democrat Party anymore. That's not going to work. And you left the Republicans, and you're not going to your church anymore. And you can't have these conversations with anyone, So it's like, yes, I can.
Well, yeah, I mean, that was why I was so. I'll tell you something. I had like such an opiate reaction to internet. Like when I first got on AOL, right around the same. I don't know if it was like a week or two before the X-Files came on or a week or two after, but it was right around the same time that I got on AOL. And I'll tell you something, it was a high that I can't even describe. I was just out of my head. I couldn't believe that I had access to all this information and to people, who shared my interests and saw things the way I did. I can't begin to tell you, like those first few years on the internet were just the most exciting time of my life, really. And a lot of it was because I was able to find people, the whole idea of find the others that Gordon always talks about. I was able to start finding some others. And in a lot of ways, like my writing career would have never started without the internet. And this is like, this is dial-up. I mean, my first modem was 2400 BPS, which is like, it's not even like a Matchbox. If what we have now is like a Tesla or something, a Tesla. It was just nothing. I mean, you can't do anything these days with, multiple times that. I mean, it was just so absurd. And like just downloading a single JPEG would take like 5 minutes, but I didn't care. It was just like so amazing. I was just so tuned in. And it was also coinciding with what we were talking about before, with like the rise of, how do we even describe it? I hate the term like alternative spirituality, because it sounds so commercial. It sounds like something you'd see in like one of those magazines they give away at the supermarket or something. But it really was like a different world, and things felt like they were moving forward again. Things felt like, things were happening, and people were starting to wake up a little and start to question things, but also, using these tools to create things and to start websites, whatever their interests were. It's all gone now. It's all gone. And it's really, really upsetting to me, because it isn't just like the internet, like dead internet theory. It's just like everything is gone. And I'll tell you something, this is going to sound maybe a little silly, but I really trace like the collapse of everything to when Borders went out of business. Borders Books and Music.
Right.
Talk about like that whole energy that I described when that first Barnes and Noble superstore opened on 6th Avenue back maybe around 92 or so. Barnes and Noble very quickly turned into a cafe with books for decoration, but it was really Borders that people were really like, people were excited, people were tuned in. Like you'd go to Borders any time of day and there would be people there, and they were open to like midnight. You'd go like at 11:30 and like the magazine racks would just be filled with people.
Yeah.
This is why I can't quit. I can't quit, this. I can't quit this right here. There is a magic to the printed word, not just the illuminated screen word, right? Not just the bits and bytes word. There's just some magic about holding something in your hands that's filled with really important information that you're really excited about, that there's no substitute for it. This is why I said like the Codex book has never been improved upon. And I love reading things on Kindle and everything. It's very convenient, especially, if I'm reading in bed, my wife's asleep, that's really convenient, but there's no substitute for this. And just like when you bought a book, when you went to a store and you put your money down on the table, right? And said, this is an investment I'm making, right? I'm investing in this knowledge. I'm investing in this person's point of view. I'm investing in whatever this represents. And you had to like, you had to pay for it, and you paid more attention to it. Like it's the same way where I would say like when we'd buy LP records, you had to pay attention to it because you had to get up in 20 minutes and flip it. Right? Or, like all these punk rock singles I'd get where like, it would be like, there'd be 3 songs in 2 minutes, and you had to get up and then flip it over again. It's like, I know that it's become kind of almost like a cliche these days to talk about like physical media, but I think just the fact that you did have to make an investment, you had to like get off your ass and go to the store or go to the library and get this book and carry it with you and hold it in your hands. There's just a tangibility there that I don't think anything else can match. And I think the fact that so few young people today read books is an absolute catastrophe for our culture. I mean, I was just recently reading something where somebody who was a college professor said that not only did none of their students report reading a book for pleasure in the past year, but none of their colleagues did either. So you have all these college professors who don't read books either. They'll put together lesson plans and probably just grab a bunch of things off PDFs and stuff off the internet, but they don't They don't read books. And I honestly, this is going to sound like really hyperbolic, but I don't think civilization can, persist without people reading books.
No.
People reading, it doesn't necessarily have to be a printed book, but if people aren't going to have the attention spans of the interest to sit down with something that's going to challenge them and take up a fairly, ordinate period of time in their lives, are they going to commit to anything? If you can't commit to that, what are you going to commit to? And it's another thing that I told Gordon recently. It's like, I just read that the average person's attention span is now 8.5 seconds. So it's not even like remember the whole thing of like back in the 80s and 90s, everything has to be like a 30-second soundbite. Right. And like a 30-second commercial, like 30 seconds was like, if you can't pay attention to something for 30 seconds, I mean, you're just done. Right. And now it's 8 seconds. So God. that's a degeneration. That is a literal degeneration. And if nothing is done to counter that, we're done. We're finished. It's over. It really is. AI is not going to solve our problems for us, because AI can't solve its own problems. So anyway, sorry.
It's okay. It's okay.
I have to get on my soapbox about this every single time. I swear to God. But it's like I just think about it all day. I really do.
Well, here we are. Well, let's keeping in theme of the show, let's move back on time to some of the archetypal classic things. If anybody again has questions about the X-Files or anything, please super chat them. But on this show, we want to get into the high level thing. Before I ask Chris about the Gnostics, Sherilyn, what do you think about the X-Files Jung intersection?
I think Chris and I discussed a little bit before about this idea of the syzygy, right? The male and female halves that Scully and Mulder represent, and maybe anima, animus, and that it's allowing you to watch this, and essentially it's one being, right? They operate in tandem, and they have
the ultimate romance.
Yeah, exactly. This sort of spiritual, this Hyros Gamos, right? This spiritual marriage that they've got. And so, and I think it allows you the ability, the permission maybe to pause and reflect and say, to see both sides of an issue, right? To go, because you don't want to take either one of if you're a woman, you want to kind of, there's all these sort of triggers in a good way, right? Not in the sort of triggering way of the word, but that if you're female, you're looking at their skull, and if you're a male, but then they're both attractive people, so then you're so it's a really genius way to get you into thinking in this dualistic sort of multi-level fashion, right? To hold this cognitive dissonance in your mind and experience that mystery. You and Gordon were talking about that it gives you permission to not have to solve the mystery, but just to be in it and experience it. And the fact that they do work with all of these mythic themes, if you will do that, people will, if you tell it, they will come. People want it. They need it. They may not know it, but they do. And I think I've told this to you and Miguel, I think, but last year I did a couple of lectures or talks at University of Montana on the archetype of the warrior across time. I did Twin Heroes of Navajo myth, and then I did Parsifal and the Grail. And I didn't know. I mean, I just figured I really want to talk about this stuff. I want to share this, with our veterans, with veteran students, what have you. I didn't know what it was going to turn out was going to be. And my model of marketing is, the 90s alternative music scene. You put up posters, talk to people, right? And that's what I did. And the university did put it on their website. But I was amazed that, on a Friday night when people could be doing anything, I was actually competing with a basketball game and a concert on campus. 50 people showed up, to just sit down and hear a story, just storytelling, right? It wasn't a lecture. It was just storytelling. And I realized, it's the same for the next one. It was about the same number of people. And I realized, God, people are so hungry for this, just to sit down. And it wasn't just elderly people or young. It was, there was old, young, veteran, not veteran. And so it really just encouraged me about at least some part of our population that's still resonating with them in person.
Yes. Yeah. I think it's on the way back. I really do. I think people are just so tired of novelty. They're so tired of amusements. They're so tired of lowest common denominator. People just, I think there is, I don't even want to say it's a movement, because it isn't a movement yet, but I think it's an impulse. It's a yearning that people want depth. People are tired of disposable culture. They're tired of like I said, the lowest common denominator. They're tired of like our worst impulses constantly being stoked, right? And I am very encouraged by that. And getting back to like what you're saying, just like one-on-one storytelling, there's just such a power there. If the person telling the story has the skills and is telling an interesting story. But what you're saying about like the archetypes, I mean, when X-Files first came on, I was reading a lot of Jung, and I was reading a lot of like kind of Jung connected work. What's that book? It was like Jung. What was it? It was, I forget what it was. I think it was Jung Girdle. I don't know. It doesn't matter. But I was reading a lot of, I read like Dreams, Memories, and Reflections, or whatever it's called. And Man and His Symbols was a huge book for me. Flying Saucers. I was reading a lot of Jung, and I was really very tuned into the whole idea of the archetypes. But I was also tuned into something that has stuck with me, and I don't know if people pick up on it, but something that I really picked up from Jung that I carry with me to this day is the notion of taking, the spiritual or the metaphysical and the paranormal, and kind of not necessarily trying to rationalize them, but catalog them and organize them and present them in ways that are more easily digestible to people. One thing that Jung really did that I really became very highly influenced by was how he tried to, and again, I'm going to use words like catalog and itemize, and that sounds like kind of facile and doesn't really give you the full scope of what he was doing. But the way that he tried to present things in the way that a scholar and a teacher would, that rather than just dumping all this information on people, like putting it into context, putting it into categories, putting it into certain, let me even put this, my brains aren't working tonight. But just present the material in a way that people can approach it objectively and rationally. Like they can approach the metaphysical, they can approach the spiritual, they can approach the paranormal in almost like a scholarly, objective fashion. And that's something that, I do with this book, and I've done with all my work, or I try to do with all my work. And that really all comes from Jung. And like I said, I mean, my deepest fixation on Jung was around like 93, 94, 95, when I was reading all that material and reading things like I said before, like Hillman and Scott Peck and all these other kind of people, reading, what's that book? Seed of the Soul. Have you ever read Seed of the Soul?
Gary Sukov, yes.
Yeah. I still have all those books kicking around, but it presented those things in a way that you didn't need to be like a believer. One thing that is really fascinating to me, and I don't know if you've picked up on it, well, I'm sure both of you have, but the way, say, just like somebody like an Alice Bailey, their whole technique is to just bombard you with just nonsense, like nonsense that you just can't process. And this is actually an intelligence technique. And what it is that you bombard somebody with so much nonsense, and people just feel overwhelmed, and they start to feel stupid that they can't wrap their heads around it. And then you throw them like these little bones, like just little things that they can grasp onto. And that's how you start to control them, because you're so overwhelmed with nonsense that when the things that they really want you to pay attention to that, you know, make a little bit more sense or a little bit more easily understood, that's where the control comes in. And that's something that I didn't even realize. I didn't even realize that. I don't even remember who pointed that out, but it is actually an intelligence technique. I think it might be related to the whole Alice in Wonderland. That's actually a technique that they used in programs like Bluebird and Chatter and everything, some of these pre-MK Ultra interrogation programs, where you just get people to try to completely lose any sense of semblance of reality or any connection to reality or rationality. You know, you basically are driving them insane. Mm-hmm. But the point I'm trying to make here is that the thing that I appreciate, even though I would often have a very difficult time sort of parsing Jung's, because he would get really deep in the weeds and way over my head. I couldn't always really grasp what he's talking about. But that those techniques, I really took to heart. And like I said, Man and His Symbols was such a foundational work for me.
Yeah, Jung himself said he was just a cumbersome writer. He was really doing his best. So he would be the first one to admit it. But
well, that's, like Philip K. Dick and his fiction, is
right.
I'll talk about Philip K. Dick and like, yeah, I read some of his novels and they're terrible. It's like, yeah, they are. He was just speeded out of his head, writing as quickly as he could because he was getting paid a penny a word.
Yeah. He needed to buy that horse meat to eat.
Yeah, you got to buy that horse meat. When I talk about Philip K. Dick, I'm talking about the 2-3-74 and after, or maybe even back to Ubik. But I'm talking about the spiritual work. I'm not talking about the science fiction work. Because to be honest with you, I have almost zero interest in science fiction anymore. I'm just completely disinterested in the form.
At the same time, going back to the Syzygy and the X-Files, you've got a great chapter on the Gnostics, which I enjoyed it. And as you've said before, and this one you really bring it home in this chapter, the Gnostics were history's first conspiracy theorists. First UFO cult, and of course you bring all the receipts, the Mandeans and their light ships and the interdimensional cloud of the Gospel of Judas. And I've done presentations on how they would go through stargates, and there was just, the Gnostics were all over the place, and the X-Files it definitely taps into it, where again, spirituality, conspiracy, and ufology, the stars are all in this perfect balance of high weirdness that you rarely get throughout history. But I love how you make the argument that Mulder is simply a Gnostic revealer, right? I mean, he falls in that pattern of bringing you gnosis and waking you up to the world.
I'm going to tell you guys a secret that I've never told anyone. Everything that I do, all of it, Secret Sun, all the books, up and down the line, Our Gods Wear Spandex, all started when I was writing something. I was planning on writing a book back in 2002 called The Gnostic X-Files.
Oh, wow. Get out of here.
Yeah,
92. Wow.
No. What did I say? 92? I meant 2002.
2000, okay.
Yeah, I didn't start writing it a year before the show came on. I'm not that psychic, right? No, but so the first project, so I'd done comic books and everything, and I did some fanzines and everything, but I'd never really written a book. And the first idea that I had is I wanted to write this book, The Gnostic X-Files. And it would really be about the argument I was making is that Mulder, he wants to believe, but he knows, right? I mean, he knows these things. He experiences these things. He investigates them. He interrogates them. And how that gave him a knowledge that isolates him from everyone else, because gnosis, true gnosis, can be very isolating, right? It makes you,
You're a stranger in a strange land.
Yes. And interesting enough, I hadn't really latched on the whole idea of the syzygy yet, even though there was an episode of the X-Files called Syzygy. And Chris Carter was always obsessed with this whole idea of twins and doppelgangers and everything.
Oh, was he?
Oh yeah. Right up to the very last season, there was an episode called Plus One, which is all about doppelgangers and everything. And it's like I can never really figure out like what he was trying to say about it, but the whole idea that like Mulder and Scully are soul twins, right? I mean, they are halves. They're two halves. It's like by themselves, they're not complete. They need each other. They need the syzygy. They need this connection. They need their soul twin. And with Mulder, it's because he lost his original soul twin, which was Samantha, his sister's taken from him. And that like took his anima. It's almost like his anima was removed, like from his soul, right?
How did he lose his sister? Like Philip K. Dick lost Jane at birth or later?
Well, his sister's abducted. I mean, that's the whole.
Oh yeah, you're right.
We're led to believe that she's abducted. It's a whole discussion we don't have time for now. But it really is like, he was separated from his soul twin, so it really is like. I'm glad you brought that up because it really is like Philip K. Dick and his sister Jane, right? His twin sister.
Because that's everything Philip K. Dick was for Jane. Every word he wrote was trying to find her.
He's trying to find his twin, right?
Yeah,
his twin.
Syzygy.
Syzygy, yes. So I took it from there, but also like you'd mentioned, like I've said for a number of years now that the Gnostics were history's first conspiracy theorists. It's history's first conspirituality because the whole belief system is based. Well, again, I mean, it's a very broad-based thing, and there are a lot of different schools with a lot of different theories and so on. But what we think of today as Gnosticism is based on this whole idea that the world is a counterfeit and it's a prison. And things, nothing is what it seems, and we really belong to this other world, this more perfect, this more pure world that we're trying to get back to. And Christ comes as the Redeemer with this salvational knowledge of this other world and how to return back from whence we came. So that is kind of the conspiracy at the center of it. But again, we've had this discussion for a number of years now, all the UFOs that show up in Gnostic scripture. People talk about the Bible, when they talk about things like Ezekiel, which I think is probably more like astronomical. That's a whole different discussion. But you have these like flying clouds that people get in and get out of in Gnostic texts. You know what I mean? It's like it's a little bit different, right? I mean, yeah, there's a lot of examples in the Bible, particularly in the Old Testament. But when you really start to interrogate them, you see that they're kind of talking about something else, a little bit more mundane. The Gnostic scriptures, no, there's just no way. Like the cloud that like lands in a cave and these little men come out and say, "Don't be afraid." It's like, come on, like how do you, there's no way of like explaining that away. It's either a description of what it is, or it's just like the freakiest coincidence in all of human history.
It's definitely out there. And of course, again, the X-Files taps right into that, the idea of gnosis, waking up, the real world, the truth. So this whole idea of the truth is gnosis. That they use the term the truth. Everything is about the truth, and it's like a capital T truth, right? And you never really understand what exactly it's referring to. Is it like the truth about extraterrestrials? Is it the truth about monsters and the spiritual realms? Is it truth about the paranormal? Is it truth about psychic? What is the truth? Well, I think, the best way to put it is the truth is that gnosis, just a generalized
knowledge that the world is not what it seems to be, and we are not who we seem to be. You know what I mean? And that is so much. I mean, that's just baked in directly, explicitly into so many storylines in the series. You know, you're not who you are. Things are not what they seem. We are not who we are. All that kind of thing.
Yeah, and as you write the conspirituality, you had it in the X-Files, but then you also had the really strong streams of first our mutual crush, Elizabeth Clare Prophet, and then of course David Icke rises in the 90s, and he's that sort of Astronosis vibe too. So those were really some strong streams in the 90s, and you and I agree, you had Elaine Pagels, but that's sort of fangless cucked kind of Gnosticism,
Well, I don't want to, I don't want to, I don't want to say anything bad about Elaine. She's done a lot of work, but
yeah, great work. But yeah,
one of the problems that I continue to have with what we call Gnosticism, and that's a word I really dislike, is that it has almost become like a scholarly pursuit in its entirety, and which is really funny because you have all these like right-wing people like James Lindsay saying, the Gnostics are the greatest threat to human civilization. It's like, shut up. What do you don't even know what you're talking about. You don't even, you got this, you read like an article on Eric Vogelin and
that's
you thought,
yeah, one book.
and then you base your entire nonsense on it. It's just like, shut up.
Well,
Gnostics,
then he moved to woke right, which was just even dumber.
Oh, it's just so stupid. Like Gnostics weren't trying to take over the world. The Gnostics were the ones going out in the desert and tripping balls so they could have experience. They didn't care about power or government or anything. It's just like, shut the hell. People just say such stupid things. It's so irritating.
Yeah, for clicks and to be invited at universities. Were you saying something, Sherilyn?
Oh, sorry, background noise.
Oh,
but
okay,
I do think it's interesting that there seems to be a sort of backlash against all that is not orthodox within the church and labeling. I don't know. It feels almost, I don't know what period of time we could liken it to.
The 90s.
The 90s.
The 80s, right? I mean, the whole religious right, promise keepers and a focus on the family. Well, here's the thing, though.
Anything that's not in this thing as satanic, and it's like, wait a minute.
Well, here's the problem, though. See, you and I came out of Protestant churches, right? Fairly traditional, fairly serious religious upbringings. The one thing that is new today is, so you're saying that, these people will be like, oh, this is unorthodox, this is satanic, anything that isn't what my particular belief system is evil or whatever. But it's like they say that, these same people that you're referring to say that about like all the other churches. They certainly say that about the Catholics. They certainly say that about the Mormons.
Yeah.
But they also say, I have seen over the years, I start to wonder if like people who become born again Christians or anything do anything else but argue and fight with other Christians and accuse them of being heretics and backsliders and secret Jews, secret Masons, whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you can add to that American Ortho Bros. They're just as bad as the evangelicals.
But they just, it's like, if all you're doing is attacking other Christians, where if you go on YouTube, evangelical YouTube, that's all it is. Literally all it is. It's not about like taking on the government or politics or even religions like Islam, which do pose a legitimate threat to Christianity. It's just about, accusing other Christians of being, spies in the house of love or something. It's just like, it drives me crazy. And it's funny because I saw this happen like back in the 90s. I was like, oh, I was online. I was like, I could finally find some other Christians to talk to. And it's just like yelling and screaming and accusing everyone of being in league with the devil. And every church is, filled with secret pedophiles and secret cannibals. I mean, just like all the most extraordinarily ridiculous nonsense. And it's just like, what kind of witness is that? Like, what if you're presenting, you're trying to be a light unto the nations, and all you do is accuse other Christians of being evil deceivers. You anybody who is curious about the church is just going to, 9 times out of 10 is just going to be driven off. They're just going to be like, these people can't even agree with each other. I almost kind of feel like, I don't know, if they were serious about their religion, they would wait until, the church had some sort of comeback before they spent all their time accusing that church across the street. We're the evangelical charismatic fellowship of this town, but they're the charismatic evangelical fellowship. It's like, do you ever see that old Emo Phillips?
Emo Phillips. Ooh,
he did this whole thing where, like, he meets another Lutheran, and it's like, your Missouri Synod, and it's like getting down to like the most specific subset of subset of subset. It's like, die, heathen scum, and it's just like one little so true
disagreement.
So I think that what Dr. Jones is talking about isn't restricted to people like Lindsay making up ridiculous nonsense about Gnostics, which just has no basis in reality whatsoever at all. I mean, we talked about the trans movement being Gnostic. It's like, no, the trans movement is pagan, and that's pretty well documented. It goes back thousands of years. You don't have to invent like some secret Gnostic sect that is somehow behind all this. It's well known. It's in the public record. So, anyway, sorry.
Yeah, I had somebody I know recently asked me about my beliefs and this and that, and I was trying to explain to them exactly what you're saying, Chris. Like, do you understand the subset of the subset of the subset of the subset in which that you're talking about? Because I'll tell you, these people over here, 4 subsets away, 6 standard deviations away, or 2 or 1, they actually think you're going to hell too.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
They think you. So but I don't think a lot of people stop and ask themselves, or think about the how minute their subset is, and what does that actually constitute if things get difficult, and it's like, we're facing a lot of existential threats. Should we not just maybe have a couple of rules? Don't hurt me, don't hurt my kids. Mm-hmm. We're good.
No, that's exactly right. We are facing so many serious civilizational threats. Maybe people should just go along to get along for a while. Even if you think, Mormons are all of the devil. Well, Mormons are really nice people, and they're really family oriented, and they're very responsible. They're very civic minded kind of people. All right. So yeah, they've got a lot of kind of wacky ideas, and, the Book of Mormon's kind of a little sketchy to some people, whatever, you know what I mean? It's like, there are bigger issues at play here. I mean, there are more serious threats to human civilization, and particularly Western civilization today, than whatever your feelings are about the Mormon church. It just drives me crazy. And I swear to God, I see it all the time on X still. Mm-hmm. You'll see like trending Protestants, and it's just a bunch of Catholics trashing Protestants. And the next day you'll see trending Catholics, and it's a bunch of Protestants trending Catholics, trashing Catholics. And it's like, yeah, okay, well, yeah, that goes back, to Calvin and all the rest of it. But it's just like, can't we just like get over it? You know what I mean? Because let me tell you something, whether you're Protestant, Catholic, Mormon, Gnostic, whatever, all the atheists and agnostics can't tell the difference at all between anything you believe, and they think all of it is as delusion and insanity. You know what I mean? And or it's just like Muslims or Hindus or whatever, they can't tell that. They don't understand the difference. This doctrinal minutia that people just are constantly fighting about. it just drives me crazy. But that's something that I was completely oblivious to. In my church growing up, which was, I mean, when I was a kid, it was like that was literally my sanctuary. That was the only place in my life that wasn't filled with dysfunction and insanity, was the church. So it was very idyllic for me in many ways. And we were also kind of isolated. I remember like all these tracks would come in, like even some like Tony Alamo tracks would come in. Because this is back in the day when all these fundamentalist organizations somehow had millions of dollars to print up all these pamphlets and send them all to churches. I remember all these pamphlets would be sitting in piles in the lobby of my church because our minister, who was as conservative as you get, I mean, he was like Kentucky hellfire preaching minister. He didn't want anything he knew what that stuff was all about. He knew it was all just manipulation and nonsense. He didn't want anything to do with Jack Chick.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Right.
I mean, I remember seeing like Jack Chick, and then there was Spire Christian comics. They would do like Archie Christian stories and stuff, and I remember seeing all that stuff when I was a kid. Dr. Jones, you probably know what I'm talking about. But Miguel, you grew up Catholic, so you were probably very blissfully unaware of some of this nonsense. But
not really. My aunt was part of the Children of God, or the Children of Christ. That cult.
Wait, not the Family International, not the David Berg cult.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
So
that's scandalous.
Yeah.
Well, was this when you were down in Mexico?
No, Portugal. I would go visit. It was in Portugal.
Okay.
Very interesting. It's interesting. I was just in Thailand, and so looking at a multi-ethnic, but a multi-religious society where Buddhism is the official religion, but they're fine with they don't get, like, nobody cares. Nobody's arguing doctrinal point, and they don't care,
Mm-hmm.
And but they do have limits. So one of the limits that they have is that you can only have a certain number, and this goes back centuries, and we went up to the historic capital, Ayutthaya, and it literally, I mean, it had Japanese people, Muslim people, Christian people, and they, at one point, they banned the Jesuits because they were burning people in India, and they said, like, Duck, we can't all live together if you're going to burn people. Like, just chill, okay? And now they have a challenge in the south of the country because it's become a majority Muslim. So they always, again, they welcome all religions. So they just don't mess with people, right? Don't mess with me. Don't mess with my kids. Do whatever you want. Nobody cares. But if they made a guideline that you could only build so many mosques per, let's say, mile or neighborhood or province, right? Because it's disruptive to the temples with the muezzin and everything. But the people in that, because they've become so populous in the South, they've well exceeded that. And now they're starting to change the laws. They've taken the alcohol out of the stores at the 7-Elevens. Well, they're not allowed to do that, but they're doing it anyway. But they're making life insufferable for everybody else, right? So there are these limits, right? The religions can coexist, but at some point you have to have these standards of, okay, here's, as a society, what we're going to accept and not accept. All right. Do what you want. But at a certain point, I don't want to always have to hear what you're doing in my house. You do what you want, but don't take away my beer. Dude, I work hard. I'm going to have a beer. Take the beer out of my 7-Eleven. It's interesting to see how really, truly poly-religious societies are navigating, and who aren't having these doctrinal minutia conflicts are trying to work this out, right? Like, okay, where do we draw the line here? Don't take my beer. Don't make me listen to you all day long. I don't want to do that.
Well, I unfortunately, I think that's going to end up being a zero-sum game.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It's like you see how and I heard John, what's his name? John Lamb Lash, in his book, Not in His Image, or maybe he said in interviews, but he said, when you become tolerant of intolerance, these things don't, if you are constantly giving ground to belief systems and people that are intolerant, you can just, read an effing book. Do you want to know how this ends up? You know,
well, I think, you know, because you see so much of that in Europe these days. I think it's really a function of cowardice. People believe, you know, there is such a thing, I think, as toxic tolerance, you know, where you tolerate people who don't like you and bear you ill will, you know, to tolerate that, you know, even if the antagonism is sort of low level, right? It's sort of like this low hum. If you tolerate that, you know, you're basically planting the seeds for your own demise. And unfortunately, we see a lot of that in Europe. And there are, you know, there are forms of Islam in Southeast Asia that aren't as, you know, as aggressive as some others. But, you know, were you talking about Myanmar, Burma? Because I know
Thailand. In Thailand.
No, I thought you had mentioned them before. But there has been you know, so Myanmar is majority Buddhist, and they've been having a lot of civil conflicts with their Muslim populations. And a lot of people, you know, say that this military junta in Burma and everything, Myanmar is responsible for it. But it's, you know, it's something that we see all across the world. But at the same time, too, it's like secular cultures can't stand up to determined religious cultures. When a culture is driven by a religious impulse, it's going to accept a lot of risk, and it's also going to accept a lot of pain that secular cultures won't. I mean, I think we're really at the end of the secular age. I don't know what direction it's going to take, but it really was based on this notion that comes really from the Enlightenment. So it's pretty old. It's pretty long in the tooth, you know. And the interesting thing, you know, getting back to the book, getting back to the whole thing with the X-Files and everything, is that not a lot of people realize it, but a lot of it really is like a religious struggle. Because if you look at some of the storylines, there's this whole thing with like a rapture, like there's going to be an alien rapture, right? And, you know, we have to collaborate, and we have to basically carry the water of these alien colonists because they'll destroy us. But if we do what they ask of us, you know, they will take care of us, and they'll take care of our children and everything like that. So that's like almost like an inverted rapture. It's like a dark rapture, right? But it is still a rapture. And they very cannily played with those ideas. But it's like the whole idea of like, I want to believe. Well, what do you want to believe? What is it you're looking to believe in? You know, I would say that so many people today aren't looking to believe in anything. I mean, and not only not believe in anything, but like radically not believe in everything. This whole rise of nihilism that we're seeing
right
in internet culture. You know, the center does not hold. The center has already given way. But now the question is going to be like, which religion is going to emerge out of what may look like civil conflict, civil strife, but is really going to be a battle of worldviews, if not specifically of religion. Okay. So one of the things that Pagel said that I thought was really interesting, she said that, you know, the backlash against the Gnostics was so intense because the Gnostics sort of ducked out of the whole battle with the Roman authorities and you know, the various repressions that were never as long lasting or serious as we've been led to believe. But, you know, they're still, you know, particularly during Diocletian's time. So I thought that was really interesting. Opagel said that they were just seen as like, they didn't cooperate. They didn't take one for the team, the way some other Christian sects do. And that's, I think, something that's going to repeat today. Now, the thing with the alien stuff that we're talking about, I honestly believe, and I still believe to this day, and I think there's a history behind it, that there is definitely an effort to create UFO religion, to create an alien religion. And that's why these creepy crawlies from various agencies have enlisted people like Diane Pasulka, because they want that religious tinge. They want to be able to put these things in religious context. I mean, I think it's probably an effort that's already has failed, right?
Yeah.
But they will try again, because they've been trying to do this since the late 40s, that there has been a distinct, well-funded and well-documented effort on the part of people within the national security state to replace theistic religions with this alien religion.
No doubt.
So,
absolutely.
And the problem is always, you were talking about the Gnostics or Gen X. The attitude is, whatever you dig, just leave us alone. But narrator, in fact, they're not going to leave you alone.
Never.
Right? It's like, so what do? We just want to be left alone, but they're never going to leave us alone. So do we just fight back, run away? I mean, what do we do?
Well, that is the question, isn't it? I mean, that
Is
is the question that we need to ask ourselves. How are we going to respond to this? Because it's happening now. I mean, this isn't like some process that's going to be unfolding in the future. It's happening now, and it's accelerating. The thing I thought was really interesting is, this huge effort that I think failed, but this huge effort to sort of create like this martyr figure out of Charlie Kirk. This very well-funded, coordinated effort, that he wasn't just, a political figure that was assassinated for his, whatever he had to say politically, if that turns out to be the case, that he was like, I don't want to say, a new Christ, even though some of the propaganda sort of spilled into that type of thinking. Maybe he was more like a new Peter or a new Stephen. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
He was, and you saw that language. It's like he was a martyr for Christ, right? And you don't pull out those kind of stops if there isn't a larger agenda at work. That like I said is unfolding, and it's happening rather quickly now, and it's going to be very interesting to see what happens. And a lot of it has to do with the superpower conflicts that are rising up now. It's almost like I wish there were aliens to fight against, you know what I mean? Because we'd all sort of band together, right? And fight remember Reagan said that at the UN, right? I don't think that's going to happen. We're going to have much more difficult decisions to make in the future, but now is the time to start thinking more seriously. And I'll tell you something, it's almost like I did the Spandex Files a couple of years ago, as like my goodbye to comic books and all the rest of it. And this book now, it's almost like my way of sort of saying, okay, this is my final report, right? This is my final report on that period of my life, because I do feel the need to move forward, move away from all the pop culture stuff, because pop culture is very much dying on the vine as we watch today.
And before Charlie Kirk, remember George Floyd? They tried this Messiah stuff too.
Yeah. That was even more surreal and disturbing. Yeah, believe me,
but nobody wants to talk about it. It's like everybody forgets this religion.
I think a lot of people are really embarrassed by it, to be honest with you. It was a moral panic. It was a classic moral panic. And people love to get caught up in those. They love to get caught up in the righteous excitement of good guys and bad guys. But I think they all realize most people realize by now, if you look at social media and so on, I think most of these people realize that they were taken for a ride and they're embarrassed by it, which is always the ever-present downfall, I think, of moral panics. Once they evaporate, once the fever breaks, it leaves a lot of people feeling really stupid, and deservedly so, in my estimation. I had a lot of people try to cancel me back in those days because I wasn't going. Yeah.
You were like, does anybody see that this is a religion? Anybody know? And there were people like, Puma and others were like, how dare you? Yes. I mean, they were being religious. They were making your point.
Yes, I was a heretic. I was the devil himself because I was not going along with the Saint George of Floyd.
And right now with the Charlie Kirk, it's where conspirituality or manufactured conspiracy has worked against it because so many on the right think that Charlie Kirk faked his death. So that's like kind of throwing everything off, right? Because
well, there is a lot, so there are a lot of people, who are on the whole Israel thing that Israel had him killed.
That's one theory.
Yeah, and then there's the whole thing where it's all like an AI hoax. He nothing really happened.
He's hanging out with Elvis and Jim Morrison somewhere.
You know what though? So much. This is the nature of social media. Particularly people who want to be influencers, people who want to make their living being influencers. You have to keep people's attention.
Yeah, get the click.
Once you lose people's attention, it's very difficult to get back. And all this stuff with Charlie Kirk, it's like if you went along with whatever the official story is, and I'm not saying the official story is correct or not. To be honest with you, I'm not really interested whether it is or not, because I'm not interested in Charlie Kirk at all. But you can't get clicks and likes and subscribers by going along with the official story when these things pop up. It's just not going to happen, particularly in this atmosphere now where it's like I'm more conspiratorial than thou, conspiracier than thou. The more ridiculous, the more untenable, the more outrageous, the more extravagant the conspiracy theory, the more attention you're going to get, at least from the people that you want to get attention from. And maybe that's another another vestige. That's another heritage, another legacy of the X-Files.
X-Files, right? Yeah, exactly.
I don't think it's a healthy one. I mean, my whole attitude with these kind of events is that I always wait. Very rarely do I jump on, particularly if there's a controversy, if there's a controversy of the kind that we see with Charlie Kirk. I mean, I did do some things with Charlie Kirk because of all the Cocteau Twins connections there too. But I didn't delve into any of the controversies or the various competing theories, again, because I'm not particularly interested. I think it's important to pick your battles, right? To choose your battles wisely, because these days it's very, very easy to get caught up in somebody else's crusade and become somebody else's dupe, And maybe these theories about Kirk will be true, but what if they're not? If you're really going that far out on a limb, trying to sell these theories and they turn out to be false, what do you do then? Of course, those circles never begrudge somebody. There's no such thing as a false prophet in those circles. Right? You can be wrong day in and day out, but if you just push people's buttons like the way they like them pushed, you shall be forgiven your transgressions.
That's it.
Well, isn't that sort of the shadow, though, of this, what all this moment that began with X-Files and internet, where, the rabbit hole doesn't have a bottom. It just keeps getting deeper. It keeps, you keep questioning.
Mm-hmm.
And the same beast that was spawned by this internet, of people not only being able to connect and find information they couldn't, and truth and what have you, that then created the narcissist and the nihilist and the amputation fetish rooms,
Stop.
sites, right?
They exist, man. It's real.
It also spawned this thing where we don't believe you. It doesn't matter if conspiracy A, B, C, D, or G, E, F, G is true or not. We don't believe you, and none of your narratives work anymore. And it's a dangerous situation, but it's also one of great opportunity for us, because if you can have millions and millions of people decode to at least their own satisfaction that the story you just fed them was bullshit within 12 hours, you have a problem on your hands. Right? Your population is no longer controllable. Right? And so obviously it's a scary moment, but it's also, there's a lot of opportunity here. And I do think, I think it's obvious from Jung and his view and my view as well, that the answer isn't secular. It is spiritual. You have to have a vision and a grounding in your spirituality to have any real meaning in your life. I do. That's where I'm situated. If you don't, I'm not going to try to burn you, but I feel sorry for you. So once we, the way I see things happening right now is what's happening organically. As the economy sort of constricts and things get more difficult, people are starting to naturally network with each other and form bonds that transcend these religious lines. I mean, they exist on this box, right? And people can shout and scream and what have you. But when people actually have to share resources, when shit gets real, as as they say, those things either are going to go away, or people will use them against each other. You know what I mean? It's going to be a 1 or 0 thing at some point, where it's going to matter or it's not.
Well, see, here's my thing, though. I will listen to any conspiracy theory about anything. And I'll consider any conspiracy theory about anything. I just need real evidence. Like, it has, and I'm not just saying like some of the things that pass for evidence are, particularly like, I mean, this is not that same thing, but like, like UFO people, like, oh my God, look at this UFO captured in daylight. And it's like clearly a Mylar balloon. It's just like, come on, just stop. But, that's obviously an extreme example, but, it's the same way with all these other competing theories. If everything just becomes a conspiracy theory, with no grounding, with no evidence, never mind proof, then that to me, that's like an unraveling. That's an unraveling. But that is a legacy of like official deception. When people just will start to automatically believe that you're lying no matter what, well, maybe that's on you for lying for so long. You know what I mean? If I lie to you constantly, right, and then get mad when I'm telling you the truth and you don't believe me, I have nobody to blame but myself. Right. But it like I said, I have no illusions about anything, particularly when it comes to official power. I just need real evidence and not just what passes for evidence, which is sort of cobbled together, like whatever. I can't even think of like the specifics of it, but that is, I think that the shadow side of questioning official deception, that you get to the point, if you're not careful, you don't know which way is up and down anymore. And that is a point that I'm very much afraid that we're steamrolling towards very quickly. And just the fact that people on the left and the right, whatever those terms even mean anymore, don't even consume the same data points anymore. You know what I mean? Like they don't have the same context of, you know, a particular controversy. They're both looking at completely different sets of facts that the other side is oblivious to.
Mm-hmm.
And that to me is incredibly dangerous.
Very dangerous.
Very dangerous. People need to sort of come together and at least agree on what evidence there is. You know, they can interpret it whatever way they choose, but if they can't even agree on what is evidence and is not evidence, that's a very dangerous place to be. And again, that is that shadow side. But there's a lot of, there's a lot of shadow sides that have emerged in the wake of the kind of things that we're talking about that sort of bubbled to the surface in the 90s. And I am very, I am very nostalgic for the 90s, not as much for the 80s, but I'm definitely very nostalgic for the 90s because it was a very exciting time for me personally. But it was also a time when there was something that passed for a consensus. People would argue about what the consensus meant, but there was still a sense that, that certain facts were in evidence, and
Mm-hmm.
again, that is no longer the case. And just, I don't need to keep going back to this whole Charlie Kirk thing, but it's just like, I've been watching these various debates between all these, people like Candace Owens and, Ian Carroll and then, some of the, people like, what's his name, Jack Posobiec or whatever his name is, people who are having these debates. And it's really extraordinary because these are people who are on quote unquote the right, whatever that means. Those terms I don't think really have any true meaning anymore. But there's definitely like sort of an impulse that we can characterize as roughly being right wing and left wing. Well, they're supposed to be all on the same side. They clearly all voted for Trump, let's just say, right? But they can't even agree on what the facts are. Like I said, this is AI, this is a hoax.
Macron's wife has a penis.
Well, that's a whole other discussion, but yeah, why? My question with that is like, why doesn't she just present them with a DNA test? Why does it have to be?
Or she could be like Crocodile Dundee in the bar scene. Hey, you're not a Sheila.
Well, who played that Sheila was the girl from Liquid Sky. I don't know if you ever saw that movie. Yeah, we should have a discussion on Liquid Sky sometime. That is a very Gnostic movie. Talk about Gnostic movies, right?
Oh my God, that brings up memories. You're right. Wow.
Yeah, exactly. But if people can't even agree on like what the facts and evidence are, I don't know how we can proceed. But I think that it doesn't matter in some ways. I think people don't care what the facts are anymore. People, we're barreling, I think, very quickly towards some type of civil conflict, whether it's going to be, very low level and performative, or that's going to be, Bosnia. I mean, I'm not exactly sure how it's going to play out, but we're definitely in the, it's not like it's coming. It's already started.
Right.
We're already there. Yeah, we've entered into that period. But that's something. I don't know if you saw the episode called My Struggle, which was the first episode of the revival series. But there was this whole monologue that one of the characters gave, and they had this sort of montage where they were showing all these scenes of violence and conflict, but they were basically spelling out that this was coming. And I remember a lot of people on YouTube were like posted that whole discussion. Maybe you could even find it and put it somewhere in the recording of this, but I don't think that's prophecy. I think that's just paying attention. And the same thing with a lot of other stories. I mean, one of the things that we didn't talk about was the whole thing with lone gunmen and 9/11. Now, this is something that I talked to Greg about on the Higher Side Chats, because a lot of people will, this whole thing where like this jetliner flying out of Boston is being commandeered remote control to flying to the Twin Towers, right? And this aired in March of 2001. Now, the people who talk about that never actually watched the episode. And there are my theory, and this is just a theory, I'm just going to preface that by saying it's a theory. I think that people approached, Chris Carter and those people and said, something's coming, something's on the way. And we want this information out there because we think it's all a big setup for, for arms deals and regime change. Now, if you really felt that this was planted and this was some sort of predictive programming or revelation of the method or whatever these terms are, would that be written into the dialogue that this plane flying into the World Trade Center was commandeered by people within our military to facilitate this worldwide campaign of regime change, which is exactly what we saw after 9/11, right? I mean, you wouldn't spill that particular tea. But I go into great length about how only people who weren't paying attention, first of all, were surprised by 9/11 at all, but were surprised by this whole idea of, flying planes into buildings, because first of all, that was something that was in the news a lot in the summer of 2001. But it's also, as I write about in the book, there have been plots to fly, planes into buildings since going back to the 70s, maybe even the 60s. So this was not anything new, right? No. The problem is that a lot of people don't pay attention. People don't pay attention to news. Another thing was this whole thing with like that seemed to predict or prophesy COVID. Well, if you actually watch those episodes, it really doesn't have a lot to do with COVID, but it is this sort of manufactured pandemic. I mean, I don't even know that I would call COVID a pandemic, to be honest with you. I think this whole thing about pandemic was just all part of the gaslighting, all part of the hype. I'm going to get myself canceled again. The whole idea, it was a pandemic of hysteria, I think, more than a disease. And there were a lot of shenanigans. I think a lot of it had to do with easing the entitlement burdens that a lot of states and countries were under, as far as their pension plans and their retirement and Medicaid and Medicare, it helped clear the decks. You had a lot of people in their 70s in nursing homes who magically succumbed to this pandemic, which again, I don't even see as a pandemic. I remember flus. I remember like flus. There was a flu around, what year was it? It was sometime in the 90s. It was around the time of the Super Bowl. Like everyone I knew got super, super sick, like really sick with the flu. And, I had what was, matched the descriptions of COVID. I had it at least once, and it wasn't fun, but it wasn't the end of the world like that flu pandemic that I went through was. Believe me, I've been a lot sicker in my life than I was with COVID. But anyway, the point being is that people on YouTube and everything have talked about those episodes, and it's just like, well, were you doing the reading? Were you paying attention? Things that I had posted before COVID, like talking about when the government just magically decided to allow the weaponization of coronaviruses in 2017. People don't remember that. Right. It was like 5 coronaviruses and I think 5 flus or something. And then we hear a lot about the gain of function and all the rest of it. So yeah, I mean, a lot of these things do pop up in the X-Files before they hit the main popular consensus, but that's just because the main popular consensus doesn't pay attention to what's going on with the science. So
yeah, well, we better I think we're hitting 2 hours, better wrap it up. This has been a really great conversation, so much more in XF Ultra. Of course, I like the mythology, Osiris, all the stuff, but your book has everything.
yes,
It's 400 pages, all the episodes, and it's a blast. It's fun.
Yes, I
it's
did
not
want to
a
make it
dull
fun.
read.
And also,
It is.
what I also do, and this is a secret that maybe I shouldn't share, but I like to make books that people can read in the bathroom.
This is one because you can just open it anytime, relax,
Yes.
open it at the different sections, read the scores,
Yeah.
read the dictionary. Yeah, it's got everything.
Yeah, I like to, that's, I'm being a little facetious, but I do like to make books that people can consume, at their convenience. They don't have to sit down and wrestle with this huge block of type, that they can get little bites, little bits and little snacks and knowledge. That's why I have all these, I don't know if you can see it here, but I have like all these itemized factoids,
Right.
and I broke everything up to make it easily digestible, because I understand that we all have such demands on our patience and our attention these days. So I do try to accommodate that. And that's why I break everything up into sections and use a lot of bullet points and all the rest of it. Because this book is very, very chock full of information. I mean, it's hundreds of thousands of little facts, and I want to present them in a way that, people can easily digest them, because I think that's going to help with retention and so on.
Yeah, and you've got like what was happening in the world when that season came out. I mean, everything is connected.
Oh yes, I'm glad you brought that up. The seasons of conspiracy. So that's right here, the season of conspiracy, and I itemize all the events that were hot topics on alt conspiracy on Usenet back in the day. All the mysterious plane crashes and assassinations and cult mass murders and mass suicides. I mean, just the whole deal.
A lot going on.
Death to figures like Tupac and Biggie and all those kind of things.
Yeah, it's a great read. Definitely check it out. Let me get here a couple of super chats. Thanks for the support, Rebecca.
Nice.
Really appreciate. Yeah, and for everybody else, like, subscribe, support, get Chris's book. Don't forget about the Occult Elvis. Let's see, Mike Frank. Always good to hear from you. Thanks, Chris. Great to see you again. I can listen to you for hours and look forward to reading XF Ultra. Great show, Miguel and Dr. Jones. Thank you very much for that. So awesome. Well, we better wrap it up. Sherilyn, as always awesome to have you on and keeping me company.
Wonderful to be in such esteemed company. I think Chris at the X-Files taught us something that Jung was teaching us as well, is to be empiricists, to believe the witness of our own eyes and our own experience, and to be that authority. So thanks for bringing that book. I can't wait to read it.
Well, hopefully the next time I make it to this particular program, we can discuss post-gnosis, because I do feel that I might need to make that my next book. We've discussed that a little bit.
About that. Yeah, you did say that would be your next project after you tackle this. Yeah.
Yes, I'm actually very excited about it, and I do want to have some discussions with you personally about that. And I would like to talk to April DeConnick as well.
Sure.
People like that throw my my new ideas past.
Yeah, let's say we'll try and get her involved. Usually, again, holidays or summer is always the better time, because I think at Rice they've got this thing where everybody's got to pitch in to be the principal and the they're just not teaching; they're all involved in administration. So,
oh God,
you know how it is in university. Everybody's got to take on more and more and more.
Oh, by the way, we have to have a discussion soon about Secret Aeon too.
Yeah. True.
Right,
Yeah, again, August really kicked my ass, and I'm still trying to recover. So I've been kind of...
Well, you know, you were sick. Dr. Jones was out of the country. I was busy with the book. I mean,
Yeah, you had to get it released. Yeah,
So-
yeah, we'll get back in the saddle. But yeah, Chris, as always, thanks for coming on, man. And yes, thanks for bringing this to the world. And everybody, read it. It's a great book.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And for everybody else, thanks for coming on AM by Gen X, and have a good Friday, a good rest of your evening, and a good weekend. And yes, the truth is out there. So are lies. Figure it out. You're a grown-up. Take care, everybody. Good night.